According to parish records from a small, unnamed town in Eastern Europe, there exists a case that was never officially closed, only sealed. The file itself is thin, almost deliberately incomplete, but what remains inside has disturbed every person who has read it. It begins with a funeral. On the evening of November 14th, 1998, a man named Stefan Ionescu was pronounced dead after a sudden cardiac arrest. He was 42 years old, with no prior history of illness. Witnesses described the death as unnaturally quiet. No struggle, no final words, just a stillness that seemed to fall over the room like a curtain. The attending doctor signed the certificate within the hour. The body was prepared and placed in a coffin by the next morning. Nothing unusual, at least not at first. Stefan's wife, Elena, insisted on a closed casket viewing. She told the undertaker that she did not want anyone to see his face. When asked why, she hesitated before saying only one thing: "He doesn't look like himself anymore." The undertaker noted this in his records, but did not question it. The coffin was sealed with reinforced nails and placed in the family home for a traditional overnight vigil. That is where the first incident occurred. At approximately 2:13 a.m., Elena's younger sister, Mirela, who had been sitting alone in the living room, reported hearing a faint knocking sound. At first, she assumed it was coming from outside, perhaps a loose shutter or a branch brushing against the window. But then it came again. 3 slow knocks. Not from the walls. Not from the door. From the coffin. Mirela later stated that she froze completely. She did not move. She did not breathe. She simply listened. There was a pause. Then a voice. It was faint, strained, as if coming through layers of wood and earth. Mirela. She would later swear under oath that it was Stefan's voice. She ran from the room immediately, waking the rest of the family in a state of panic. When they returned together, the room was silent. The coffin sat exactly where it had been placed. There were no further sounds. The family dismissed it as shock, grief, imagination. But Elena did not look convinced. She refused to enter the room again. The funeral proceeded the next day under heavy tension. Several guests commented on the atmosphere, describing it as oppressive and unnaturally cold. One elderly neighbor claimed she felt a sudden wave of nausea when standing near the coffin. Still, no one dared open it. Stefan was buried that afternoon. For a brief moment, it seemed like the events had ended there. They had not. 3 nights after the burial, the caretaker of the cemetery, a man named Petru Vasilescu, reported something unusual during his routine inspection. He claimed that as he passed Stefan's grave, he heard a sound beneath the ground. At first, it was indistinct, like shifting soil. Then it became clearer. Knocking. Petru described it as deliberate, rhythmic. 3 knocks followed by a pause, then 3 more. He stood there for several minutes, unsure of what he was hearing. Then, according to his statement, he heard something that forced him to leave immediately. A voice. Muffled, distant, but unmistakably human. "Let me out." Petru did not return to the cemetery that night. By morning, the story had begun to spread through the town. Some dismissed it as superstition. Others, particularly those who had attended the vigil, began to connect it with Mirela's account. The family was informed. Elena's reaction was immediate and extreme. She demanded that the grave be opened. The authorities refused at first. There was no legal basis for exhumation so soon after burial. But Elena persisted, insisting that something was wrong, that Stefan had not been at peace. Eventually, under pressure from both the family and growing public concern, permission was granted. The exhumation took place on November 19th. Present at the scene were 2 local officials, the undertaker, Petru the caretaker, and Father Andrei, a priest from the nearby parish who had been requested by Elena. The grave was opened without incident. The coffin, however, showed signs that immediately unsettled those present. The wood was scratched from the inside. Deep, jagged marks lined the interior surface, concentrated near the lid. Several of the nails had been bent outward, as if something inside had tried to force them open. But the most disturbing detail was not the damage. It was the sound. As the final layer of soil was cleared, Multiple witnesses reported hearing a faint vibration coming from within the coffin. Not movement, not breathing. Something else. A low, continuous murmur, like whispering. The officials hesitated. One of them suggested stopping the procedure entirely. But Elena stepped forward and insisted that the coffin be opened. Father Andre agreed, but only after reciting a brief prayer under his breath. The lid was pried loose. What they saw inside would later be described in fragmented, inconsistent reports, as if none of them could fully process what they were looking at. Stefan's body was not positioned the way it had been placed. It had shifted. His arms were bent at unnatural angles, his fingers curled tightly against his chest. His face, though pale and lifeless, was frozen in an expression that several witnesses described as strained. But the most disturbing detail, his mouth was open, not slightly, wide, as if caught mid-sentence. The undertaker immediately stepped back, refusing to come any closer. One of the officials began to recite a prayer, his voice shaking. And then it happened. According to every witness present, the sound that had been described earlier, the whispering, became clearer. It was coming from Stefan's mouth. At first, it was too faint to understand. Just a dry, rattling murmur. But then it formed words. Slowly, deliberately. "Do not close it." No one moved. No one spoke. The voice continued. "He is still here." At this point, Father Andre stepped forward, his expression changing from confusion to something far more serious. He later wrote in his report that what he heard next confirmed his worst suspicion. The voice did not belong to Stefan. It changed. Mid-sentence. The tone deepened, the rhythm shifted, and the words that followed were spoken with a clarity that no dead body should possess. "You buried me alive." Elena screamed. The officials ordered the coffin to be closed immediately, but Father Andre stopped them. He raised his hand and spoke firmly. "No. If you close it now, it will not stay buried." Silence fell over the grave. The wind picked up slightly, carrying with it a smell that several witnesses described as wrong. Not decay, but something older, something stagnant. Father Andre leaned closer to the coffin, his voice low but steady. "Who is speaking?" There was a pause. Then the mouth moved again. Not naturally, not like a human forming words, but something forced through it. "We are." At that moment, one of the officials collapsed, later claiming he felt a sudden pressure in his chest, as if something had pushed the air out of his lungs. The priest did not step back. Instead, he reached into his coat and removed a small crucifix. And that was when the whispering stopped completely. For a single, fragile second, everything was silent. Then Stefan's body smiled. The expression did not resemble relief. It was not peaceful, nor was it human. Witnesses later described it as something practiced, like a movement that had been learned, not felt. The lips stretched too slowly, the corners pulling wider than they should, exposing teeth that had already begun to darken with death. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to withdraw from the open grave. Father Andre held the crucifix steady, his eyes fixed on Stefan's face. In his written statement, he admitted that at that moment, he felt something he had never experienced before in all his years of service. Not fear, recognition. He later wrote, "It was not the body that concerned me, it was the presence inside it. Something aware, something listening." Elena fell to her knees beside the grave, trembling uncontrollably. She kept repeating Stefan's name, over and over, as if trying to anchor him back into something familiar. But the thing inside the coffin did not respond to her. Its attention was elsewhere. Slowly, unnaturally, Stefan's head turned. Not toward his wife, toward the priest. The movement was stiff, accompanied by a faint cracking sound, like wood under pressure. His eyes remained closed, yet there was no doubt in anyone's mind that whatever was inside him could see. The mouth opened again. This time, there was no delay. "You should not have come." The voice was clearer now, stronger. It carried a depth that seemed to resonate beyond the physical body, vibrating through the air itself. Father Andre did not lower the crucifix. "Leave this body," he said quietly. The response came immediately. "No." The single word echoed in a way that made several witnesses step back instinctively. Petru, the caretaker, later claimed he felt the ground shift beneath his feet, not physically, but in a way that disoriented him completely. Father Andre began to recite a prayer in Latin, his voice steady despite the tension that now gripped the scene. As the words left his mouth, the reaction was instant. Stefan's body convulsed. Not violently but sharply, like a sudden jolt of energy passing through it. The fingers twitched, scraping against the inner lining of the coffin, producing a dry, scratching sound that caused Elena to cry out. The voice returned, louder now. "Stop." The priest did not. He continued the prayer, each word measured, deliberate. The air grew heavier. Multiple witnesses later reported a sudden drop in temperature, though no official measurements were taken. Breath became visible in the cold air above the grave, forming pale clouds that lingered longer than they should. Then the voice changed again. It fractured, layered, as if more than one speaker was trying to force their way through the same mouth. "Stop." The word came out distorted, overlapping itself, deeper tones colliding with higher ones, creating something that no longer sounded human. Father Andre raised the crucifix closer to Stefan's face. At that exact moment, the body reacted in a way that none of them could explain. The eyes opened. They were not clouded, as one might expect. They were focused, alert, and they were not looking at the priest. They were looking past him, towards something behind. Father Andre paused for the first time, only for a second, but it was enough. The voice spoke again, quieter now, almost calm. "You brought it with you." The priest turned his head slightly, just enough to glance behind him. There was nothing there. When he looked back, Stefan's head had tilted further than before, at an angle that should not have been possible without breaking the neck entirely. The smile returned, wider, strained. The voice dropped to a whisper. "It followed you." At that moment, Father Andre later admitted that doubt entered his mind. Not about the presence in the coffin, but about something else. Something he could not see. The prayer faltered just briefly. And that was when everything changed. Stefan's body jerked upward, not fully sitting, but lifting just enough for the shoulders to rise from the base of the coffin. The movement was unnatural, rigid, as if pulled by invisible strings. Elena screamed again, backing away from the grave. One of the officials shouted for the coffin to be sealed immediately. But before anyone could act, the voice erupted, no longer restrained. "You cannot put us back." The ground beneath the coffin shifted slightly, loose soil sliding inward as if drawn by some unseen force. The edges of the grave began to crumble, dirt falling against the sides of the coffin in uneven bursts. Father Andre stepped forward again, forcing himself closer despite the rising panic. "In the name of God," he began, his voice stronger now, "you have no claim here." The reaction was immediate and violent. Stefan's body slammed back against the base of the coffin with a force that echoed through the grave. The sound was hollow, final, but the movement did not stop. The fingers clawed upward, dragging against the wood, producing that same scratching noise that Mirela had heard nights before. Only now it was louder, faster, desperate. The voice fractured again. "You closed it." A pause. "You sealed it." Another pause. And then softer, almost pleading. "He cannot breathe." The shift in tone caught everyone off guard. Even Father Andre hesitated. For a moment it sounded like Stefan. Not the distorted voice from before. Not the layered presence. Just Stefan. Weak. Strained. Trapped. Elena moved forward instinctively, her hand reaching toward the coffin. "Stefan," she whispered. The priest raised his hand sharply. "Do not touch him." But she was already too close. The moment her fingers brushed the edge of the coffin, Stefan's eyes snapped toward her. The change was instant. The softness vanished, replaced by something cold, something aware. The voice returned, no longer pleading. "You came back." Elena froze. "You opened it." Her hand trembled against the wood. The smile widened again, stretching further than before, until the skin at the corners of the mouth began to split. "You should not have opened it." The ground gave way beneath one corner of the coffin, causing it to tilt slightly. A low rumble followed, not loud, but deep, as if coming from far below the surface. Father Andre stepped between Elena and the grave, gripping the crucifix tightly. Enough. His voice carried authority now, something firm, unyielding. He began the prayer again, louder this time, each word cutting through the air with precision. The reaction was immediate. The body convulsed again, harder this time, the head snapping back against the wood with a dull crack. The eyes rolled upward, showing only the whites, but the mouth continued to move. The voice screamed, not in pain, in anger, a sound that did not belong to any living thing. The temperature dropped further, the air growing so cold that frost began to form along the edges of the coffin. And then, without warning, everything stopped. The movement ceased. The voice cut off mid-sound. The body went completely still. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. For several seconds, no one dared to move. Father Andre lowered the crucifix slowly, his breathing controlled but shallow. Elena remained frozen where she stood, her eyes locked on Stefan's face, which had changed again. The smile was gone, the mouth was closed, and the eyes were no longer open. It looked normal, lifeless, empty, as if nothing had ever happened. One of the officials finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's over." But Father Andre did not respond. He continued to stare at the body, his expression unreadable, because something was wrong, very wrong. He stepped closer to the coffin one final time, leaning in just enough to hear what no one else could. A sound, faint, barely there, coming not from the mouth, but from deeper inside. A whisper, not escaping, not fading, waiting. "We are not finished."